I thought I was just tailing a cheating husband. Turns out I was chasing a killer. What started as a routine case ended with explosions, blood money, and a secret that nearly got me buried. Hey there and welcome to my world, where betrayal is real and sometimes the truth stings more than the lie. The building I worked out of was a grand old brick place, 2 stories tall, with the kind of presence that made you slow down just to take it in. It used to be the kind of country manor that housed old money and hushed conversations over crystal glasses. But now, nestled on the edge of downtown St. Louis, it sat in a part of the city that had seen better days, though folks were starting to breathe new life into it, converting crumbling memories into sharp, modern offices. That old house had been repurposed like a faded suit turned into something smart and tailored. The bottom floor had 4 separate office spaces, each one carved out with care, while the second story held 2 roomy apartments. If you walked through the towering 10-foot-tall double doors, heavy oak with brass handles, you'd step into a foyer that led to a wide hallway stretching straight to the back. At the end of that hallway, you'd find a big steel door with a glowing red exit sign humming above it. That corridor was lined with 4 doors, 2 on each side, each leading to someone else's dream or hustle. Now the first door on your left? That was mine. It was thick old-fashioned wood, solid enough to stop a charging bull. Set right in the middle was a pane of frosted glass, just fancy enough to make you pause. Painted across it in gold-trimmed black letters was a sign that had only been there a few weeks. Jack Weston Investigations, Security Specialist. That's me. Jack Weston. Some folks like to throw around words like legend or hard-nosed, but honestly, I'm just a guy who couldn't walk away from the truth. Used to be, I was detective first class for the St. Louis PD. Had a badge, a beat, and a belief that I was one of the good guys. But life's funny like that, it waits until you're not looking to hit you with a left hook. I came home early one day thinking maybe I'd surprise my wife. Her name was Danielle. What I didn't expect was to find her tangled up in more than just excuses, with none other than my commanding officer, Captain Ben Carter. Everything I believed in just came crashing down in one moment. Anger doesn't ask for permission. I confronted Ben right then and there. Words were exchanged. So were fists. The fallout? I ended up divorced, stripped of my badge, and slapped with a misconduct charge for assault and insubordination. The city gave me a settlement, hush money really, and I could have just vanished. But I wasn't built to sit around licking wounds. After a few months of pacing the floors of my apartment and drowning in coffee, I used the payout to set up my own private investigations office. Small, quiet, just me and my instincts. The name on the glass might have changed, but I was still chasing down the truth. Only now, I didn't answer to anyone but myself. I remember what Abby, an old friend and real estate agent, told me when I was scoping out this building. She said, "The place you work in says everything about you. If you want serious clients, you better look like someone worth their secrets." She was right. I might have been operating solo, but appearances mattered. Business was good enough. Thanks to the settlement, I didn't have to take every case that came across my desk. I could be selective, pick and choose the stories I wanted to unravel. Most nights, I could lock up and be home before the moon made it over the buildings. That afternoon, I was just getting ready to shut down when I saw the silhouette. He came in sharp and smooth like a man who always got what he wanted. His suit looked like it cost more than my car, tailored to the point of arrogance. I didn't even need to hear him speak to know he was trouble dressed in money. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore," I said before he even got to his point. "I don't handle domestic cases." He didn't like that. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened. "You'll be well compensated," he insisted, not blinking. "But see, money's not the reason I got into this line of work. The truth is a lot messier than a paycheck, and when love turns to lies, even a $3,000 suit can't hide what's rotting underneath." "I'm afraid I can't help you, Mr. Whitmore," I said again, this time leaning into his name a little, making sure he understood I wasn't budging. He glanced around my office with a kind of smug condescension, as if the worn leather chairs and framed certificates on the wall offended him. "Don't you need the money?" he asked, his voice lined with arrogance. "Not yours," I replied coolly. "Now I suggest you see yourself out. Our conversation's over." He looked genuinely caught off guard, and for a brief moment I found myself chuckling under my breath. I dropped my feet from the edge of my desk and stood up, stretching slightly. There was something oddly satisfying about turning down a man who was used to buying his way through life. The door creaked open just then, and in walked Abby, my friend, my steady presence, the one person who made this chaotic new chapter of my life feel just a little more grounded. She'd been with me through the fallout, through the broken marriage and the bitter taste it left behind. As she stepped into the office, I didn't hesitate. I wrapped her up in my arms and kissed her hello. "Well, hello there," she laughed, catching her breath as she leaned back with a surprised grin. "That must have been one heck of a good day." I smiled, still holding her hand. "Landed my first case, on my first official day in this office. And it's a rich guy, no less." "Told you," she teased, nudging me with her elbow. "You and the major, both of you were right. A better address brings in a better breed of clients." But Abby was always good at reading me, and right away she noticed something was off. "You don't exactly look thrilled about it," she said gently. Before I could answer, my mind wandered back to the file I just read, the case that rich man Whitmore had dropped into my lap. It involved a woman who could have walked out of the pages of a high-end lifestyle magazine. Tall, elegant, with that natural kind of beauty that doesn't need much help. She carried herself like she'd once been a cheerleader or homecoming queen, someone used to attention. But something didn't sit right with me. She'd spent an hour and a half inside a boutique earlier that week and walked out without buying a thing. That might not sound like much, but when you're trained to notice the quiet details, it raises questions. I remembered reading in the business section that Whitmore had met her during a product presentation. She was unveiling some sleek new tech his firm was investing in. Apparently he was taken by her on the spot. 6 months later they were married. The story made headlines not because of romance but because it moved so fast. Back at the cafe where I was running surveillance, I watched them from a distance. When they finally got up to leave, Whitmore tried to pull her close and steal a kiss. But she turned her head, politely but firmly. Her body language said more than words ever could. Whatever this was, it wasn't something she was ready to flaunt in public. Not yet. She walked to her car and drove off, and I was quietly relieved. That oversized cup of diner coffee had started working its way through me, and I made a quick detour to the restroom before hitting the next stop on the case. Later that day, I found myself standing in the gleaming lobby of One Metro Square. The receptionist, all business and lipstick, gave me a nod. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. Go on in." If the building's owners were trying to impress high-end tenants, Whitmore's office was their showpiece. 2 of the walls were nothing but glass, stretching from the floor to the ceiling, offering an unobstructed view of the Gateway Arch and the wide sweep of the Mississippi River. It was the kind of view that made you forget your own name for a second. "You don't see that every day," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. My admiration was short-lived. "Do you always stand there gawking, Mr. Weston?" Whitmore said from across the room, that same smug tone cutting through the silence. And just like that, the moment was over. Abby worked for a consulting firm that specialized in helping both local and national charities with everything from publicity to fundraising strategies. Some days her job meant late dinners, networking events, and even the occasional trip to another city. But today she'd shown up early, and before I could even stand to greet her, she plopped right down onto my lap with that mischievous smile of hers. "So," she said, brushing a speck off my collar, "how'd the meeting with your fancy new client go?" Now, I know better than to spill the beans about ongoing cases. Technically, client confidentiality is sacred in my line of work. But with Abby? Well, sometimes I made exceptions. She wasn't just anyone. Later that night, we found ourselves at one of those charity galas she often had to attend. The kind with crisp white tablecloths, candles glowing in glass holders, and floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my week's groceries. Around the room, 3 open bars were doing brisk business. And for the price of those tickets, the drinks better be free, I thought. A bandstand and modest dance floor were set up in the back of the hall. I leaned into Abby, eyeing the space with a smirk. "I don't think you could run a full-court press on that thing, but maybe a half-court game?" She rolled her eyes and laughed. We eventually made our way to our assigned table, seated with her boss and some folks from her firm. I fetched us a couple of drinks and offered my hand for a dance. Abby accepted, but just as we reached the floor, something caught her eye. A woman, tall, striking, clearly someone Abby recognized, walked briskly past us, brushing by a man without even acknowledging him, and headed straight into the ladies' room. "See," Abby said under her breath. "That's their mess to sort out." We danced for a few songs, and afterward I leaned in, whispering close to her ear. "I do recall some mention of further compensation. So, shall we keep dancing or head upstairs?" She shot me a look that said she already knew the answer. With that confident smile I knew so well, she took my hand and led us out of the ballroom, up to a suite she'd arranged earlier. That's Abby, always 10 steps ahead and never one to hesitate. The following Sunday I was back in my office, shuffling through some paperwork, when something about the case started gnawing at me again. Some folks chalk things up to coincidence, but in my experience too many coincidences stop being coincidence at all. Cynthia and Hamilton, The two people at the center of this mess weren't just acquaintances. They knew each other. And not just casually. That kind of connection followed by back-to-back tragedies? It raised every red flag I had. If this bothers you, Abby said, now leaning against my desk, why not ask Frank to look into it? I already did, I told her. But the police report said it was a carjacking gone wrong. As sad as that is, she replied, shifting off my lap, it happens a lot around here. Sure, I said, rubbing my chin. But Abby, the Robinsons aren't exactly living paycheck to paycheck. They've got real money. So what was Cynthia doing in that neighborhood at that time of night? And why was the car still there? Her eyes narrowed slightly as she followed my train of thought. A mugger would have taken her purse, I continued. And her jewelry. And if it really was a carjacker desperate enough to shoot her, why didn't he drive off in the car? Instead, she's found slumped over on the passenger side. None of this adds up. Abby nodded slowly, processing. You think someone wanted her gone? I think someone made it look like a random crime, I said, my voice low. But it was anything but random. I paused for a second before I said it, just to be sure I was ready to draw the line in the sand. This wasn't a robbery gone sideways, I told Frank, my voice low and steady. This was murder. No doubt in my mind. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. It was Frank's turn to absorb that truth. He didn't respond right away, and I knew that meant he was processing it, measuring the weight of my words against his own experience. I need to bring this to the detectives handling the case, he finally said. I'll be in touch. I hung up and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Something about this whole thing, the scene, the players, the timing, it all pointed to more than just bad luck or coincidence. There was something darker underneath it, maybe even connected to both deaths. Later that afternoon, I spotted Ricky's beat-up Chevy Impala parked out front of the Flying Saucer Draft Emporium. It sat there like a ghost from another era, faded paint, rust creeping along the doors, a car that most people would have written off at first glance. But I knew better. Ricky's ride was just like my truck, beat to hell on the outside but built to roar underneath. Both of our vehicles had been tuned and tweaked by the same back-alley miracle worker, a mechanic who could give a dying engine a second life with nothing more than a wrench and a cigarette hanging from his lips. I parked beside him and headed inside. We exchanged a few words, caught up over a beer. Ricky had his usual way of downplaying things, but he was a good guy to have in your corner. Just as he stood to leave, he hesitated at the table. Oh, and hey, he said, glancing around the room before leaning in. Don't be surprised if you get a call from a weird number. I might be using a burner phone. Just in case. With that, he turned on his heel and left, humming the Star Trek theme under his breath like it was just another Tuesday. A little after 2 p.m., I found myself back at the towering One Metro Square building. I parked the truck in a commercial garage, dusted off my jacket and made my way through the shiny front doors. The lobby still smelled like fresh polish and ambition. The same receptionist greeted me with a polite smile as I walked through the foyer. I had to admit, my opinion of her had gone up. She wasn't just there for show. She was sharp, and I could tell she kept tabs on more than just appointments. I didn't even get a chance to say much before she buzzed me through and I was back in that glass-walled corner office of Jonathan Whitmore's. The view was still breathtaking, but today I wasn't here to sightsee. Whitmore barely looked up before launching into his next revelation. I went over their financials, he said, tossing a folder onto the table like it was a casual move. Everyone thinks I'm the one with the deep pockets, but it was Cynthia who had the real money. I raised an eyebrow. You sure? I heard they met when she was selling him a computer system. That's how it started, yeah, he replied, but she wasn't just a sales rep. Cynthia owned the entire company. Maybe she liked staying involved, doing the groundwork. He was right. That kind of ownership doesn't always mean walking away from the trenches, especially for someone who built it from scratch. And another thing, he added, flipping through some papers, the Robinsons weren't exactly soulmates. That whole marriage? It was smoke and mirrors. I motioned to the server for the check. Something about this place, this conversation, I was ready to leave it behind for the night. I had a buddy dig around in Robinson's background, Whitmore said. I looked at him sideways. Tell me he didn't do anything illegal. Nope. Just pulled up public records. Hard to find maybe, but they're out there. As we stood, I kissed Abby quickly on the cheek, wanting to leave this trail of clues behind for now and get back to what was supposed to be a date. Just something real for a change. I opened the door to my Cadillac CTS coupe and helped her in. This was the car I used when I needed to make a good impression, meet clients, show a little polish. My truck was for digging through the dirt. The Caddy was for the surface level shine. As we drove, my thoughts drifted back to something Ricky had told me. Cynthia, before she died, had tried to borrow money. When the banks turned her down, she didn't go to friends. She went to a loan shark. Not the smartest move, I muttered aloud. Those guys are vultures. The kind that don't wait for you to die before they start feeding. Yeah, Ricky had said, but sometimes when you're desperate, they're the only ones who say yes. Anyway, Ricky said, taking a long sip of his beer, Stella's really struggling to keep up with the payments. The interest rate this guy's charging? It's insane. If she's even a day late, he tacks on another week's worth of interest. I nodded. Yeah, I know how that game works. Vigorish. Juice. Whatever you want to call it. Remember, I used to be a cop. How deep is she in? I asked. He let out a slow breath. Last I heard, close to $8,000. And he's charging her over 20%, weekly. That's not a loan, I muttered. That's extortion with a handshake. I made a few calls and found out the guy running the racket, Tommy Valenti, had recently moved shop. Switched the bar he was working out of and tightened his circle. That meant less walk-ins, more regulars. If he was still collecting from his clients after they got off work, he'd be set up at the bar by early evening. When I walked into the joint, I spotted him right away. Tommy was parked in a deep, wraparound booth near the back wall like some low-rent godfather. He had on a deep blue silk shirt that shimmered under the dim lights, enough gold chains to set off a metal detector, and, get this, cream-colored linen pants. Come on, Tommy, I thought. Nobody wears linen pants in St. Louis unless they're trying way too hard. Seated next to him was his muscled Jimmy Rice. A big guy with a face like a wrecking ball, scarred, tired, and not someone you'd want to owe money to. They called him 9 Lives Jimmy, because he'd supposedly survived more than a few close calls. The way he was eyeballing me, you'd think I was his 10th. Tommy leaned back as I approached, arms spread wide like we were old friends meeting for lunch. What brings the famous Jack Weston to my corner of the world? He asked. Cut the charm, Tommy, I said flatly. It's about Stella. You need to ease up on the interest. Tommy laughed, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. You know how this works, Weston. I leaned in. Yeah, and I also know you don't want me digging around in your business. So how about this? Drop the interest. Let her pay off what she owes without breaking her spirit. Or her fingers. Tommy stared at me for a long second. Then he exhaled hard and slumped a bit in his seat like a balloon letting out air. All right, Weston, he said, his voice low. You're just crazy enough to mean what you say. I'll back off. But she'd better pay every last dollar. I reached into my coat and dropped one of my business cards on the table. If she misses a payment, you call me. Don't send Jimmy to collect. Don't leave any bruises. Just pick up the phone. Tommy had the card. Since you're being so reasonable, I'll play nice. Appreciate it, I said, nodding at Jimmy as I turned to leave. Always a pleasure, fellas. After that, I gave Jake a quick call. He was one of those guys who knew a little bit about everything that happened in this city, even if he pretended otherwise. Hey Jake, I said, do me a favor, take a look into that case involving the woman who got hit. I don't need a full autopsy, just see if she was targeted. If the shooter was some bum looking for a fix or if someone paid to have it done. Jake hesitated. Jack, I'm not into the strong-arm stuff. You know that. I'm not asking you to be, I replied. You've got ears everywhere. Just listen. He sighed. All right. No promises, but I'll see what I can dig up. There's no clock on this, but sooner's better than later. After the call, I took Abby for a drive through Compton Heights. It was one of those crisp, early fall afternoons, the kind that reminded you life could still be beautiful even when everything felt like it was unraveling. As we turned onto Longfellow Boulevard, I slowed the Corvette to a crawl and pointed out one of the older homes that always caught my eye. The place was stunning, built from smooth white cord stone that had been hauled in from a bluff nearly 50 miles up the Mississippi back when everything was built to last. Used to be a carriage house over there, I said, gesturing toward a matching stone garage. They just don't make places like this anymore. Abby leaned closer to the window, admiring the craftsmanship. It's beautiful. I nodded, but my mind wasn't on real estate. Somewhere in this city someone had planned a hit. And I had a bad feeling it wasn't just a random act of violence. I just hadn't mentioned the word contract yet. Abby always did have a habit of worrying more than she needed to. As I kissed her goodbye that night, I whispered, I'll be home around 1. Don't wait up. She gave me that half smile that meant she wouldn't listen but appreciated the warning anyway. I left our apartment and climbed into my old, faithful pickup truck. This wasn't a job for the Cadillac or the Corvette. Those cars wouldn't last 5 minutes in the neighborhoods I planned to visit. My truck, though? It didn't draw attention. And when you're poking around in the shadows, that's exactly what you want. That first night of tailing leads didn't bring much. A few names, a few faces, but no solid movement. I decided to give it one more night before shifting my strategy. Sometimes these things take time. Other times, you don't get a second chance at all. Just ask Boyd. Boyd never got a shot off. The guy he was with, Jasper, barely managed to blink before things went sideways. 2 clean, fast shots, what the Marines call a double tap, hit Jasper square in the shoulder and the thigh. A third shot dropped Boyd before he could level his weapon. I'd learned that move years ago from Jacob Tully, a master gunnery sergeant turned police firearms instructor. He taught precision, speed, and control. Most of all, he taught you never to pull your gun unless you were ready to use it. Neither Boyd nor Jasper would die, but after the pain they were about to experience, they might have preferred it. Paramedics got there in time to keep them breathing, and I made sure to keep my distance from the uniforms while they worked. Later, Frank caught up with me. His face was a mixture of irritation and admiration. "You talked them into giving you a name, didn't you?" he asked. I shook my head. No confirmation. No denial. Frank groaned. "Come on, Jack. Once they're patched up, they'll clam up. If you've got something, let me in. Give me a chance to move on it." "I can't, Frank. If I tell you now, you'll have to follow protocol. That means paperwork, warrants, maybe even surveillance. You'll spook the guy, he'll lawyer up or vanish before you get a shot." Frank stared at me frustrated. "And your way?" "My way gives us a chance to bring him in. Clean. Solid. No slip-ups." He didn't like it, but he knew I was right. I placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a look. "I'll keep you looped in. When the time's right." Later that night, Abby and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She reached across and took my hand, warm, steady. "I know you'd never do anything to hurt me," she said softly. "So, yeah, just like that. I trust you." I nodded and took a breath. "There's something I need to tell you." Her expression shifted, concern flickered in her eyes. "You know I've been digging into Jonathan Robinson," I began. She nodded. "Well, last night 2 guys pulled guns on me. Tried to shove me into their car." "What?" she whispered, her voice tight. "They said their boss wanted a word. And if I didn't go willingly, they'd grab you to make sure I complied." Her grip on my hand tightened. "What happened?" "They didn't get the chance," I said quietly. "They're in the hospital." I watched her, waiting for the fear or anger to bubble up. But Abby was solid. She didn't flinch. "There's talk going around that Thornton was behind the hits on Hamilton and Cynthia," I continued. "One of the guys who tried to snatch me mentioned his name directly. Said Thornton ordered them to bring me in." "You didn't go," she said, stating the obvious, more a test of her own nerves than a question. "No, I didn't. I don't play by their rules." Abby leaned back in her chair, her voice barely above a whisper. "How much more do you know, Jack?" "Enough, I thought. But nowhere near enough to stop." "I know who Thornton reports to," I told Frank, watching the lines tighten around his eyes. "And I've got a pretty good idea where I can find him." Frank's jaw clenched. "Let us handle it," he said, his voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. Almost a command. I shook my head slowly. "You guys can't go where I'm going. And even if you could, it wouldn't do any good. This isn't a case you close from behind a desk." Frank didn't answer right away, which told me he knew I was right. "So what's your plan?" "I'm going to find Thornton," I said plainly. "And I'm going to get him to admit who gave him the order." Frank rubbed his temple like the conversation itself was giving him a migraine. The man I suspected was behind Thornton? His name was Vito Seiler. And if the rumors were true, Vito wasn't the kind of guy who handed out orders lightly. He had his hands in a lot of things, most of them dirty, and he didn't like surprises. Rudy was one of Vito's enforcers. Not just some meathead with a short temper. Rudy had a reputation as a professional, cold, quiet, dangerous. He was Vito's nephew, brought into the inner circle because Vito didn't trust just anyone to cover his blind side. I'd crossed paths with Rudy before, a few years back when I was investigating another one of Vito's businesses. Back then we'd moved around each other carefully. No threats, no fists, just mutual recognition. He was good at his job and he knew I wasn't the type to scare off easily. When I met up with Rudy again, he looked half asleep in his chair, slouched and casual like he didn't have a care in the world. But his eyes were sharp, sweeping the room constantly, missing nothing. That's what made him dangerous. He didn't need to look awake to be ready. Later that evening, after my meeting with Vito and his people, I called Abby. She was staying with her parents until this all blew over, and even though we'd agreed it was safer that way, It didn't make the distance any easier. "Can I come home?" she asked softly. There was a hopeful ache in her voice, one that cut through the noise in my head. "It's only 8, I said gently. "Another 3 or 4 days tops and I'll be done. When this is over, I'll catch a bus out to your folks' place. We'll take a couple of days for ourselves, go boating on Jack's Fork, maybe fish, maybe just breathe again." "I'd like that," she whispered. "But why not now? Let the cops handle the rest. You've done enough." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to tell her she was right, that I'd step back and let the system take over. But I couldn't. Not yet. Back in the holding room, I was sitting across from Jasper. He looked rough, pale, bruised, bandaged, but he was alive and he had questions. "You're telling me the cops won't let us slide on this?" he asked, glancing nervously between me and the guard at the door. "I mean, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, attempted murder?" "Yeah," I said. "Those are serious charges and you're not walking out of here on a handshake. But I can see to it that you're protected while you're in custody, or at least as much as anyone can be in your position." Jasper hesitated. "What do you want in return? You know Vito Seiler?" I asked. He nodded faintly. "Well, he's not exactly thrilled with Thornton these days. If you help me take Thornton off the board, I'm pretty sure Seiler will put the word out that you're under his protection. That could buy you some peace inside." Jasper narrowed his eyes. "You want me to help you bring Thornton down? Just like that? Just like that?" "And what about the law?" he asked, a little edge creeping into his voice. "You think it's okay to take this into your own hands?" I shook my head. "I'm not skipping the law. I'm just getting ahead of it. Thornton can tie all of this back to the man behind the curtain, Jonathan Robinson. That's the one I want." Frank chimed in from the corner. "Even if you get Thornton, the case is weak. Boyd and Jasper's testimonies won't hold up on their own. Any decent attorney will argue it's all hearsay. Circumstantial at best." "Maybe," I said, turning back toward the door. "But I think I can make Thornton believe we've got the goods to put him away. Maybe for a long, long time." I slid behind the wheel of my truck, put it in gear and stared down the dark road ahead. This wasn't about bending the rules anymore. This was about finishing what I started. I gave him a casual wave as he stepped toward me. I could tell by the way he moved, tense, twitchy, that he wasn't coming in peace. He got close, real close, and when I didn't back down, he lost whatever patience he had left. His fist came flying toward my head, wide and clumsy. He was angry, not thinking. And that was a mistake. One thing I learned from my years on the force: never throw a punch unless you know how to take one in return. Rule number 1 in any fight? Don't leave yourself wide open for a counter. As his arm swung past, I stepped in tight, so close I could smell the sweat on his collar, and drove a short, sharp jab straight into his solar plexus. Right where the ribs meet the sternum. That's the sweet spot. My fist landed hard, exactly where I meant it to. His breath vanished in an instant, diaphragm paralyzed. He doubled over, mouth open, gasping for air he couldn't catch. Textbook result. I slipped off my jacket and stepped back, watching him wobble. By the time we made it to police headquarters on 9th Street downtown, he was cuffed and barely speaking. Frank had to handle the arrest paperwork as usual. On the way to his car, Frank looked over at me, exasperated. "You realize," he muttered, "that as soon as Thornton talks to his attorney, he's going to demand that fingerprint report. And we've got nothing to show him. If we stall too long," he added, "Thornton walks and I'll be lucky to keep my badge. They'll bump me down to foot patrol again. I'm too old for that mess, Jack." I shook my head. "Not true. I already checked. Thornton hasn't been formally charged or indicted. The state's not obligated to hand over any investigative results at this point." Frank narrowed his eyes. "Then why's he in custody?" "For questioning," I said flatly. That's when Frank walked back into the interview room. A tall, sharply dressed young woman followed him in. She was striking, long legs, sharp features, dressed in something that said, "High Retainer," and "Zero Tolerance for Nonsense." If the situation hadn't been so serious, I might have found her distracting. Frank pressed a button and restarted the tape recorder. "All right, Mr. Whitmore," he said, his tone neutral but firm. "If you decide to tell the truth, you could walk away from this with a lot more than your freedom. There's reward money involved." It wasn't long after that things started spilling out. A few weeks passed. Then we got the break we needed. It came from a confession, raw, strange, almost matter-of-fact. "The Hamilton guy," the man said, barely looking up. "He had a boat up on Alton Lake. Real nice one." "How did you do it?" Frank asked quietly. "I disconnected the air pump," he said. "The one that keeps the fumes out of the bilge. You know, BG? Something like that. I nodded slightly, letting him go on. Then I scraped the insulation off the starter wires. Just enough. When he turned the key, boom. Spark lit up the fumes like a match in a gas can. He paused, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I was up on the dirt bank above the marina, watching, just in case it didn't go off. But it did. The boat exploded while Hamilton was still seated behind the wheel. Cling. Silent. Remote. This wasn't just revenge or rage. This was planned. Cold-blooded. I can go down if you need me to, I said, but Frank waved it off. You were in the room during questioning, he said. We're good. We made our way to the hallway. Frank pushed open the heavy door, turned to a nearby jail officer, and gestured toward the suspect. Put this piece of garbage in a cell until he's arraigned, he ordered. A cell. Not the holding tank. The officer nodded and took W's arm, guiding him firmly down the corridor toward the deeper recesses of the building. No sympathy. No ceremony. Just another man in cuffs heading for a cold bed and 4 gray walls. Stone, the lawyer, had already left to make further arrangements with his client. Probably trying to figure out how to spin all of this into something salvageable. I watched them disappear down the hallway, the door swinging shut behind them. I hope it sticks, I muttered. I want W to pay for what he's done, but more than that, I want Robinson. I want him to answer for all of it. Frank didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring off like he was trying to line up the pieces in his head. For a moment, I wondered if he was just going to walk away. Then he let out a slow breath. I had Ricky pull Robinson's financials, he admitted. That's it. That's all I asked him to do. And? Frank gave me a tight nod. Turns out Cynthia was the one with the real money. But get this, there was a check Robinson wrote just days after Hamilton's boat blew sky high. Large amount. No corresponding withdrawal showing on his ledger. I raised my eyebrows. Go on. Frank continued, lowering his voice. There was another check. Same amount. Written right after Cynthia was killed. He tried to hide it, but the pattern's too clean to be a coincidence. He glanced at me to make sure I was really hearing him. Each time someone got killed, Robinson moved money. And not small-time charity cash either. That was all I needed to hear. Minutes later, we were bringing Robinson in. As we escorted him through the precinct, something in him snapped. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe he realized the walls were finally closing in. He suddenly tried to bolt, made a run for the exit. Bad idea. Frank reached for him, but Robinson slipped past. Then it was my turn. I stepped into his path and threw a quick left hook. Nothing fancy, just a clean shot to the jaw. His legs buckled, and he dropped right onto the tiled floor, landing on his backside with a dull thud. I walked over and stood above him, breathing hard but calm. I told you, Jonathan, I said, deliberately dragging out his name with just enough sarcasm to make it sting. I told you I'd see that you got what was coming. He looked up at me, dazed, jaw already starting to swell. Frank moved in, rolling Robinson onto his stomach and securing the cuffs. This time there were no deals. No hiding. No money to make it all disappear. He was done.